what if the life of the Nintendo Entertainment System didn't end when it did? What if Nintendo of America's decision to pull the plug on licensing didn't matter, and the console's end of life could have been decided solely by the market? That almost happened, thanks to a third-party, unlicensed Canadian game and hardware manufacturer named Camerica, and the developer Codemasters. Today, we're going to have a quick yap about the Aladdin Deck Enhancer, and what it almost meant for the mighty NES. Yes, Deck Enhancer. Don't blame me, I didn't name it. Our story begins as Camerica entered the gaming market in 1990 as the Canadian distributor for the game Genie, a Nintendo cheating device by UK development company Codemasters. The game Genie itself was a bit of a happy accident. When Codemasters felt they'd been given the brush off by Nintendo at a consumer electronics show, they began to work on their own NES game development kit, and to reverse engineer Nintendo's 10NES lockout chip. That's the thing designed to prevent the NES from playing non-licensed games. In the process, Codemasters inadvertently learned to hack NES games for lives, invincibility, etc. Nintendo was not amused. Following the game Genie, Camerica furthered their deal with Codemasters to include games for both the Canadian and US markets. Unfortunately for Camerica, Nintendo had a stranglehold on gaming retail in America. Following the success of unlicensed third-party developer and distributor Tengen, who was, in fact, Atari, Nintendo flexed the muscle of their success with retailers. If major outlets wanted to access Nintendo's licensed games, hardware, and the console, they could not sell unlicensed games. So, Camerica took their games to a different retail venue, the Home Shopping Network.
So what we're going to do is leave the bracelet for you in the system during the break.
Keep in mind, this was in the days before the internet and internet shopping. And it worked. I haven't seen the numbers, but the games clearly sold well enough that most were easy to find in used video game shops. Flash forward to 1991. At this time, Sega had been making big gains in the United States with their 16-bit Sega Genesis. They were ahead of Nintendo technologically by a couple of years, since the Genesis had been in US stores since 1989, and their marketing was also peak.
16-bit arcade graphics.
You can't do this on Nintendo.
Nintendo needed to make a technological leap as well, and they released the 16-bit Super Nintendo Entertainment System in North America for Christmas of 1991. While many gamers were ready to move forward, as evidenced by Sega's growth, others lamented the thought of buying a brand new console after such a short span of time.
He has a Game Boy, and now he has the Nintendo, and now he'd have to have another unit just for that one game.
People were used to using the same devices for decades. Stereos, TVs, household appliances. Add to that Nintendo's decision to use an inferior processor to that of the Sega Genesis, and the lack of backward compatibility with original NES cartridges. Sega had an adapter to play older Master System games in the Genesis, despite it having a smaller audience in the US. And that's just the first year. The second year of the Super Nintendo was supposed to be the big one. Sega spanked them that Christmas with their blast processing campaign.
The Sega Genesis has blast processing. Super Nintendo doesn't. So what's blast processing do?
The beginning of the next year, 1993, could have been another blow to Nintendo. Codemasters developed what they called at the time the Aladdin Master Cart, or the Aladdin System, later renamed the Aladdin Deck Enhancer. In essence, it was an NES cartridge without the ROM, a game cartridge with everything except the game. Just the basic memory and their Nintendo lockout chip defeater, along with a slot to insert a smaller micro cartridge. It also touted a 64K memory upgrade for improved graphics, which is listed on the box. However, according to Kevtris Horton, this upgrade is missing from the device itself. Leaving that aside, this was still a big deal. It meant third-party games by Codemasters/Camerica and potentially other developers could now be manufactured and sold at lower cost, without paying Nintendo for that seal of quality, and without concerns over Nintendo eventually phasing out NES licenses altogether. During the 1992 Winter CES Consumer Electronics Show, Camerica said the device would hit store shelves in February of 1993, after being given 30 days of exclusive sale on Home Shopping Network. That's right, it was going to be in stores, including a deal with Toys R Us. Sadly, this is where everything in our story goes wrong. The demand from retailers for the Aladdin was there, but Camerica was in financial trouble. Deliveries started running late, and orders started being canceled. The money, quite simply, ran out. But, as I said, the issue was delivery. Aladdin hardware and some games were manufactured. The undelivered stock started to appear years later. First in 1996, when Video Game Connections, a game store in New Jersey, stumbled upon a small cache of the Aladdin with its pack-in game, plus the additional 6 cartridges that were manufactured for the launch. Then, starting in the early to mid-2000s, even more supplies were discovered. And curiously, these later units that were found had Aladdin deck enhancers with a slight redesign, marked V2 near the UPC. The main difference with these designs is the lockout chip bypass. V1 used a manual switch, similar to the one found on standard Camerica NES cartridges. V2 had no switch and worked automatically, but that version of the bypass meant trouble for the more rare, top-loading Nintendo Entertainment System released toward the end of the console's official lifespan. As for the games that were released, there are 7 out of an announced 25. The first game is the only Aladdin exclusive, Dizzy the Adventurer. For the rest of the library, all 6 titles are also available on standard NES cartridges, though a few have some differences. Identical to their standard cartridge counterparts are Big Nose Freaks Out, Quattro Adventure, and Linus Spacehead's Cosmic Crusade. Micro Machines is also essentially identical, except the Aladdin version can be played on European NES decks. Also nearly identical is Quattro Sports, except for an unfortunate bug in Baseball Pros. Reportedly, the Aladdin version always forces you to play 10 innings, even if the game is not tied. But the one and only game that saw a true overhaul is the Aladdin version of The Fantastic Adventures of Dizzy, another title starring the mascot character. Compared to the standard NES cartridge, gameplay speed is improved, there are some changes to level layouts, inventory management is updated, and the number of stars to collect has been expanded from 100 to 250. What about the other announced games? Well, some are lost media, but some already were or wound up on standard NES cartridges. And there are rumors that some other Aladdin cartridges were manufactured and are just rotting in a warehouse somewhere, waiting to be discovered. Looking back, the Aladdin is fascinating. Even if consumers were lied to about the built-in 64K memory expansion, it is a good idea. One that could have sold well if it had made it into toy and game stores as planned. Camerica had other plans they'd announced around the same time, too. The most attention-grabbing was a promised device to play Nintendo Game Boy games on the NES. In my eyes, consistent new games for the Aladdin plus a Game Boy to NES adapter would have spelled trouble for Nintendo and the Super Nintendo in the USA. We might be looking at a very different console landscape today, if Camerica could have made those deliveries on time.